Atheist Nomads, episode 228, Women Beyond Belief.
The podcast you're about to listen to includes cursing and talking about hoo-haws. Please be advised.
Welcome to the episode of Atheist Nomads. I am Dustin, and joining me is Lauren.
Hello.
In just a minute, we'll be joined by Karen Garst, and we'll introduce her more as we get there. With any luck, by the time this episode goes live, Kylie will have been born. If not, then, well, she'll be right around the corner. Yeah. So watch the Facebook page and Twitter if you want to find out more, because I will post there when she is born. But we're recording this in October because I'm banking up some episodes so that we can take the month of December off and you don't miss anything.
Yay!
So yes, but parental leave will be happening for the show, but the show will continue to go on. This also means that we are recording both this and the episode for this week at about the time the Blue Angels are performing, or not Blue Angels, Thunderbirds are performing at the Gowan Thunder Air Show here in Boise.
Yeah, the snowbirds were impressive. I slept through it, but I mean, I was aware that they were flying right over the house, but I
was watching them fly directly over our roof, 150 feet up, directly over me, 150 feet. So that was pretty cool.
Very cool.
But we do need a quick message from our sponsor, and then we'll be able to go through the interview uninterrupted. Atheist Nomads is probably brought to you by Archway Hosting. Check out their low-price, full-featured hosting solutions at archwayhosting.com. That's ARCHWAY hosting.com. We're also brought to you by listeners just like you. You can find out more at patreon.com/atheistnomads. That's patreon.com/atheistnomads, or you can just find links to both on the website.
Think of the children.
Or child. And so, yes, we are now joined by Karen Garst of the Women Beyond Belief book and another upcoming book.
Yay!
Karen, welcome to Atheist Nomads.
So thank you for having me.
Yeah, you've been trying to get on for a while now, and I've been meaning to try and get you on, but we had some changes in format and personnel, and yes, now we have you.
Pretty much interviews tanked for a couple of months, so now we're getting back into it, which is awesome.
I totally understand, and I'm a dog with a bone. I got my spreadsheet. I keep going back to people.
Well, good for you, because that's how it works. That's how you do it.
Yeah, the squeaky wheel gets the grease.
There you go.
I wouldn't describe her as a squeaky wheel. I mean, that's kind of...
well, you know what I mean.
Okay.
So, Karen...
dog with a bone is good.
Dog with a bone.
Dog with a bone. Or the barking puppy gets the belly rubs.
or the barking dog gets the bone.
Belly
love
rubs.
It.
Yeah.
Like that.
All right, so Karen, let's start off with your book that is already out, Women Beyond Belief. And let's start with the big question before we get into what the book is. Why?
Well, you would think that once I retired, I would, just sit and plant flowers or something like that. And actually, the first 5 years, I did my genealogy and traced my ancestry back to 1635. Joined the Daughters of the Revolution. In our little chapter, 3 of us related to the person who came over in 1635.
Oh, no!
Amazing,
right.
Yeah. And then I finished that. And I was having lunch with a friend of mine who's an author. And she said, you should really write a book. Well, it just happened to be 2 days after the United States Supreme Court, in its decision Burwell v. Hobby Lobby, decided that this privately held company, because of its deeply held religious views, didn't have to provide certain forms of birth control to its female employees under the Affordable Care Act.
Yeah,
right.
Lots of air quotes there.
Yeah.
There you go. And so I said to my friend, well, the only thing I can get pissed about is religion. So I came home and started to call friends who I knew were atheists, and decided to focus on women. And somebody introduced me to Peter Boghossian, and I plied him with sushi lunches, and he introduced me to everybody. And the rest is history.
Oh, very nice.
Nice. And why was it that you decided to get women's voices for this? Well,
if you go looking, and I did some research on Amazon, there's an easy way to do this, and of course I did it the hard way. You can just go to best-selling books on atheism, and it gives you 100. Of course, I entered them all in, and with a spreadsheet and everything, because I didn't know that. But, upwards of 90 are written by men. And so they're great books. I've read a great deal of them, but I think the women's voices are missing. And the other thing is that it's women who are subjugated by religion. So we really should have more women speaking out about this. And one of the things I often say is that religion is the last cultural barrier to gender equality. I don't think we're going to get to gender equality while we have religion, whether it's in the United States or Saudi Arabia or anywhere else.
Oh, fully agree.
Yeah.
And what's odd is your typical church, 60% of the people in attendance are women.
Oh, absolutely. And they're the ones
they're the
who
churchgoers, and they're the subjugated
they're
ones.
doing all the work. Exactly. And Sonia Johnson, who was excommunicated from the Mormon Church when the Equal Rights Amendment was first being distributed to the states, and she said, "My hope is someday there aren't any women in the pews." Yeah. And I totally agree with her.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, and you wonder why there's so many women in religion, and so you'd think that there would be a very loud group of women in atheism, but personally, from what I've seen, is it's a minefield.
Well, I do think that. Go ahead.
It almost seems as bad in the atheist community as it is in any church.
In terms of
how women are treated, especially online. If they voice their opinions, or, they're always being talked down to, mansplained to, called feminazis. It kind of makes it hard to even want to step into it.
I have had pretty good experience with the people who are the real activists in the community, the authors, the speakers, etc. And I felt really, really welcomed. And then I did attend the Women in Secularism conference about a year ago and met a lot of women, although men attended as well. And I think we can talk about this later, the Metathesis Milwaukee conference was pretty discouraging. And we can go into that.
Yeah. Oh, we will.
Later.
By the time this episode goes out, that's old news, but still getting the perspective of somebody who's there. Awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. It'll be old news, but it's a symptom of a disease, of a problem that we need to keep addressing. Yeah,
definitely. Now, of course, the questions I was asking about, why this book, and it was some of that. I know those are stupid questions because, yes, we need more women's voices. Yes, we just need more women's voices in atheism. I think there's a huge factor in why 2/3 of atheists are men and 2/3 of the people attending church are women, is because 2/3 of atheists are men. So they're most of the voices, they're most of the people in attendance, and it makes it a lot harder for women to feel welcome.
Yeah, I think that's part of it. And I think women, I was just looking over a blog post I wrote about why there's more women in churches. Women are the ones who end up doing a lot of well, in my Lutheran church, they were the Lutheran basement women because that's where in fact, I have a cookbook called Lutheran Basement Women, how to make a casserole.
Oh,
they were the ones who were doing the work. And my 96-year-old mother-in-law is still on the committee to make food for the funerals at her local Catholic parish. We're talking fairly desperate. But they're the ones who do the work, and they're the ones who meet other people, and so they're friends. And one of my authors, Marcia Abelman, said when she and her husband left the church, none of the people would have anything to do with her. Yeah. So it's kind of like, gee, do I want to lose all my friends? So I think it's harder. And then Sikibo Hutchinson wrote a book called Moral Combat about African Americans. And she talked about, kind of it being a social safety net, and whether that's knowing other people that you can ask for help, or maybe the church itself. And people are unwilling to give that up because they feel if something happens to me, where do I go? What do I do? And that's a huge group of people they're friends with. And people will not talk to you. I was at a Halloween party last night, and I've been talking to this woman for like 20 minutes. And then I started talking about my writing. She literally walked away.
Oh.
So, yeah, it was really funny. She couldn't even listen to, talk about atheism. But I think there's risks of using or losing community. And so that's part of it. But you'd think with the terrible way women have been treated in the Bible and throughout Christianity, and even today, we are the one who should say, well, I'm not going to have any more of this. This is ridiculous.
Yeah.
But they're not. And when I started watching YouTube videos and debates, a couple of years ago, they were almost all men. I rarely saw a woman debate. And I started to call people and, women who had written a book on atheism and, why aren't you in the debate, et cetera, et cetera. And, one woman was a philosophy professor and she had written a book about philosophers without God. But, it was kind of a side thing for her. And then she got back to her other stuff. And Annie Laurie Gaylor told me they always call and ask Dan to speak. And so there is some, I've seen panels in atheist conferences where they had all men.
Oh, absolutely.
Like 7 men. And you go, didn't it occur to anybody maybe a little diversity in there wouldn't be a bad idea?
If they have women speakers, it is probably in a specific women in secularism, like one little forum that gets, and then everything else is men.
Yeah, and I started this summer writing to some groups about I'd be happy to speak. Some I didn't even hear from them. Not, we'll think about it, whatever. I didn't even hear from them.
Oh, man.
And I've got to do some more of that. But it's real discouraging.
Well, that's why, I like, okay, I'm a woman who's always been an atheist, and I could, share some of that, but I'm still terrified of being ignored anyway, I guess. It's like, man, kudos to you. You've got ovaries of steel to go out there and tell these people, it's like, no, you need to have my voice in there.
Exactly. And I've been an atheist probably for a couple decades, my husband and I, and all my friends knew I was an atheist because when we left this kind of spiritual church, if you will, there was a financial crisis and I had something to do with being deep throat to the newspaper, et cetera. So pretty much everyone knew we'd left the church. And then when we talked about that, we said, we're atheists and now we're done. So when I started writing the book, I started to reach out to friends I knew were atheists. And several of those are in the book. And then I went to, the Humanists of Greater Portland or Center for Inquiry group and started to solicit some more people. And then I got on social media and got some people who were a little further afield and had a little different story. But everyone knew I was an atheist.
Yeah. And it's amazing how much people love to talk about themselves. So it should be easy to go out and say, hey, do you want to be in my book? But at the same time, people are also very scared of being in public. Being a public atheist.
Several of them are using pseudonyms. It's not their real name. Somebody hasn't told her mother yet, and her mother's elderly, and she just, doesn't want to do that, which is, totally legitimate. But almost all the other ones use their real names. And I, obviously Portland, Oregon is pretty progressive, but it was pretty easy to find folks and who were willing to tell their stories.
Yeah.
So it was fun.
Yeah, Portland has a lot of atheists. There's also a lot of religious people there.
Exactly.
They've got a lot of the crazies in there. They've got
yeah.
a healthy mix of both.
All right, so
there you go.
What is the Women Beyond Belief book? Tell us about that.
Well, Women Beyond Belief, Discovering Life Without Religion is an anthology of 22 women who tell their personal stories of how they left religion. And some of them, and I could read some excerpts later on if you'd like, are traumatized 30 years later because it was a fundamentalist. It was incredibly abusive. And when you're young and your parents tell you, if you do this or if you don't do this, you're going to go to hell, your brain holds on to that for so long because you're so malleable. And so some of the people, really were traumatized by their religion. I was raised as a Lutheran in Bismarck, and I always call it namby-pamby Lutheranism.
Yeah.
They didn't tell all the negative stuff. And when we read Martin Luther's catechism, they didn't tell about his comments that if women die in childbirth, it's no big deal because they're just there to have children anyway. And, you know.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, you skim over that. Skim over the nasty stuff.
Skim over that part. Yeah, skim over the Bible story
but
about
look at all these
Jephthah.
good things. That,
and I'm sure also definitely skimming over Luther's The Jews and Their Lies.
The Jews and Their Lies. Yep, that one too. And the story in the Bible about Jephthah who said, God, if you let me beat the Ammonites, I'll give you the first person who walks out of my house, and it's his daughter. And as opposed to Abraham and Isaac, he sacrifices her. I mean, literally the Bible story is, okay, I'm going to kill you, my daughter, because I told God I would, and God doesn't intervene. Hello?
Oh, God gets off on that.
And with that story, almost as disturbing is she's given a couple of days to go mourn with her friends. And the only thing that they're mourning is the fact that she's still a virgin.
Yeah, she's going to die a virgin.
Oh my God, it sounds like Teen Cosmo. Like, you know, those young girls haven't changed much.
Well, hey, nobody said there was a good editor to the Bible.
Yeah, that's true.
Right. And, you know, they got the 2 stories of Genesis and the 2 of Exodus. So now I hired a professional editor for my book, but I guess they weren't around back then.
Just some old guy who's barely literate.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, and of course, the teen girl mindset from the perspective of an old man.
Oh, yeah.
Perverted old man.
Go.
Yeah, this can be pretty twisted. Yeah.
Well, and then I also wrote the appendix, which talks about women being subjugated through the Bible. I put myself through reading the entire Bible word for word. And I had never done that before. And I was really surprised with a lot that was in there.
I haven't touched the Bible since I was probably about 14 when I went a little stint where I was obsessed with Lucifer and Lilith. But I never read through the whole thing. As an adult, I get the benefit of people cherry picking either all the good stuff or all the bad stuff. So I don't have to go through the effort of doing it.
There you go.
So I'm like cruising super lazy. I'm like, yeah, but it is like seriously like almost every couple of lines a woman is being abused in some way.
Oh, in high school, I went to an Adventist boarding school. For the college writing class, we had to do a position paper. And the one I did was tongue-in-cheek. The teacher thought it was the best one out of all of them because I actually pulled off being funny, which is not something I do all that well with. And he read it before the class, left it anonymous until we got to see everybody's response. And it was... The position I took in the paper was that women are the root of all evil, and it was fully backed by the Bible.
Yeah.
Oh, and he thought you were serious?
No. He knew it was tongue in cheek.
Oh.
And because you go through it from Adam and Eve to Jezebel to
people believe that.
Yeah.
Herod's brother's wife and her daughter. It's all the bad stuff in the Bible happens because of a woman.
Well, and I did when I started to write the book, I thought, well, I did go to a Lutheran college, but I thought, maybe better read some more of this stuff. And what's so interesting is reading about early mythology and where there was clearly, and I don't think there's a lot of debate about that now, but there was a female divine. Mm-hmm. And if you look back, even in the Paleolithic with all those figurines, but certainly moving forward, there were clear indications that there was a feminine divine. And in the Bible, they were in Canaan, and one of the goddesses in Canaan is Asherah. And that word not only stands for goddess, but it stands for tree because she was worshipped in nature with a pillar, with a tree. And the goddess for a very long time was associated with a snake because when it was a female divine, there was this idea that it's all a cycle. It's all part of life and death. And you come from the earth, you go back to the earth, etc. And because a snake, it rejuvenates and sheds its skin, it was often the symbol for the goddess. Well, what better way? I mean, any literature teacher would say, oh, if you want to debunk something, take all their symbols and turn them around.
Exactly.
And that's exactly what they did. They've got a snake, they've got a tree, they've got a garden, and they got a woman, and what better way to eliminate a feminine divine and support a male deity than make her responsible for sin?
Yeah.
So it's the whole tableau of the goddess turned on its side.
Well, they even get some weird texts that tend to be poorly translated. That if you go literal, it talks about God and his wife.
Well, and there was a big piece of pottery that I use in my slideshows that says on the top, Yahweh and his Asherah, which could be why, and it has a picture of a man and a woman.
Yep.
So I remember writing about that once. But when the Bible talks a lot about Baal, and that's the bad pagan god, etc. But Asherah was a goddess, and there's a place in Jeremiah, I think it's chapter 44, where they talk about the Queen of Heaven, which may have been Asherah or Anath, I'm not really sure, or Astarte. But they said, we're going to go back to praying to the Queen of Heaven because everything's going to shit, and it was better back then. So if you read the Bible carefully, I mean, it's that monotheism, as Karen Armstrong says, it took about 600 years to really get monotheism, and they didn't edit the other stuff out.
Yeah, they left it.
You've got God and his assembly of gods. Oh, gee, sorry about that. And there's there's different names for God. There's Yahweh, there's Elohim, and those are different writers at different times who call them something different. Well, so, if you study the Bible and believe it, I don't know how.
Where it gets really interesting when you get El and Elohim. Elohim is the plural of El. El means God. So literally it's talking about God and gods. And
exactly.
El as God just meant that was the high Canaanite god, the chief of the gods. Right. And you get it used interchangeably, like in Genesis, for example, going back and forth between El and Elohim. And the use of Elohim gets explained away as being the royal we. Well, the royal we is a inherently English concept.
Yeah, that is super Eurocentric.
Anglo-centric,
absolutely,
even more so.
Yeah, it's like no, you can't take current cultures and then look at ancient cultures and apply current standards to the ancient. Yeah, that doesn't work.
Well, and when you say, like I quoted, the assembly of gods, I mean, they don't even try to dress that one up. I mean, it basically says the assembly of gods. So,
all I know is that nothing will piss people off more than talking about Christianity mythology. That's great.
Oh, yeah.
That's what got me on the suicide watch list in high school.
Oh my goodness, why?
Because I was doing research into Lucifer and Lilith, and I was talking about Christian mythology, and I think that was the term that got me in trouble. Because ever since then, if I ever went to the librarian had to watch me.
Oh, that's amazing.
It was amazing. It was, now that I look back on it, I'm like, oh my God, I should have sued the pants off those people. But whatever.
And that's Idaho Falls.
Yeah.
Which is eastern Idaho.
Sorry about that.
Very Mormon.
Due north of Salt Lake City. There is a temple in Idaho Falls. There are temples on both sides of it, just a few miles away. Yeah.
Yeah, and they couldn't do anything else to me, so they put me on suicide watch. It's like, what does that even mean? It just meant the librarian had to watch and make sure I didn't check out any bad think.
Oh, you're so lucky you figured it out early on, though.
Oh yeah, no, it was fun.
I always tell our son, I always tell our 26-year-old, I said, you're lucky you were raised secular.
Oh, yeah.
I did try to teach him the Bible stories because I thought, when he's studying literature and stuff, but my commentary was too long. I'd do the Genesis, and then I'd have to explain why they put the woman down and the mythology of the goddess, and I said, oh, forget it.
Oh, yeah, no, I grew up at Unitarian Universalist Sunday school where, we learned,
good for you.
We learned Bible stories. We didn't cover all of them, so when I heard about... God, I can't even think of the guy that got eaten by the whale.
Jonah.
I didn't hear about that until middle school. And I'm just like, these people are talking about it. I'm like, no, go back. So what happened? And you believe this happened? And my like, I was just so incredulous of it that it actually convinced a couple of my friends to like think about it in different terms.
Wow.
It was great.
Well, when I was growing up in the 50s and 60s in North Dakota, everybody went to church.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I could tell you so-and-so went to this church, so-and-so was a Methodist, whatever. And it was, I hadn't even heard the word atheism. And it was just, everyone went to a church.
Yep.
And when we did Edith Hamilton's mythology book in high school, nobody said, well, gee, isn't there a myth missing here? You know, nobody would have said it. No, it would never have occurred to anyone to say it.
How different from is your hometown from Lake Wobegon?
I'm sure that's...
Well, we're more like Fargo.
Okay.
You know?
Okay.
Yeah, sure. You betcha. Yeah.
My mom would love to visit, I'm sure. She loves accents.
Well, you know, it was a great place to grow up. It was very safe. We, of course, walked everywhere. And, you know, played kick the can in the alley at night till it got dark. But it was very conservative. There weren't a lot of different viewpoints.
Which I think
you kind of heard the line.
Yeah, I think that actually contributes to the idea of a place being safe is when everybody's a part of the same religious community.
Yeah, the same tribe.
You got, it's a tribal thing. Yeah. It's like, because you know that within a week, that if you get in trouble, every parent in church is going to know that you had gotten in trouble. And, you know, if there are any other kids involved,
one of the biggest,
everybody's in trouble.
One of the biggest deals was a bra bandit. Somebody was going on clothing lines, outside clotheslines and stealing bras. That was a big deal.
Wow.
Goodness. Yeah. Scandalous.
The bra bandit.
It was probably, what, a 13-year-old?
Absolutely scandalous.
But when that's
crazy.
the worst that you have to deal with, you think, oh, this is actually a great way to raise children. I grew up with the same amount of safety. It was just, I went to UU instead, where I learned about Hinduism and Buddhism and paganism, but you still have that community. And it's really nice to see atheists stepping up and actually creating their own communities and places. Yeah, that's awesome.
And we have several of those. We have them. We moved kind of south of town in a little town called Silverton. But Salem has atheist communities. Portland has atheist communities, several to choose from. When we left, we just slept in on Sunday and didn't bother to join anything. And I didn't really reach out to those groups until I decided to write the book. And they were very welcoming.
Yeah. No, I know when I left religion, last church service I went to, I was the one preaching, and I went to a UU service in Tacoma, and it was weird and foreign and strange and terrifying. And I ran away, and I enjoyed my weekends off.
Well, you know, we have in Portland, we even have in one of the suburbs a minister who's an atheist, and the congregation knows he's an atheist. And people come there for community. Doesn't really matter.
What denomination is that?
Presbyterian.
Okay. Oh.
Yeah, there's some interesting mixes in these coastal cities.
Yeah. Okay, so back on to the book. You have some excerpts you wanted to share.
Yeah, I'll read a couple of them. This one is by a woman who was raised as a fundamentalist. And this occurs 30 years after she let go, okay?
Okay.
As I tried to let my beliefs go, my head seemed far ahead of the rest of me. I would think, that makes no sense. But I would be assailed by intense fear and doubt. I felt all of my old fears and beliefs still skulking inside like the biblical Leviathan, a sea monster that lurked in the deep. I felt wrong, as though I had committed a terrible crime and I was going to be punished. Whenever I got near anything to do with my religion, a Christian coworker, a bumper sticker, a debater, a speaker, something on the internet, or the news even, or especially my own family, I went into a tailspin of dread and doubt for days. I kept thinking the fear would diminish, but it went on for months and months. My fear was so ingrained that as I wrestled with my beliefs, I had shadowy nightmares, and I felt like things were creeping up on me in the middle of the night. As I sat in my chair reading, there were times when I involuntarily glanced upward as if lightning might crash through my ceiling. When I attacked my beliefs about Satan, it felt as if he was in my room with me. This was a complete surprise, not to mention freaky. After 30 years away from my religion, my mind was still being assaulted with irrational fear for disbelieving. And that, we talked a little earlier about, a young child who's indoctrinated. Mm-hmm. It's, I would say some of these fundamentalist religions, it's really child abuse.
Oh, yeah.
It is. It's guilt and fear for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
For some people. I mean, some people, they never lose that.
It took me, I doubted the existence of God long before I doubted the existence of Satan. Or, excuse me, long before I got over the fear of Satan. Mm-hmm. It's bizarre how powerful that is. Once you reach that point where you think you're on the right path, or are you just being deceived by the devil?
Oh man, I literally cannot imagine a life like that.
It sucks.
Well, here's another excerpt talking about just what you said, that strength that the religion has. And this is by Taylor Duty. Faith is a powerful motivational tool. Religion provides an explanation for the unknown and a justification for literally any atrocity, natural disaster, struggle, or hardship. It's incredibly effective in mass manipulation as well in the rationalization of sacrifice, and accordingly becomes a powerful tool when exploited by individuals and institutions. Human beings want to have hope and want to believe there is, for example, life after death. We yearn for concepts that provide a deeper meaning and structure to human life. Religion is an easy sell. In this context, its prevalence throughout history and across almost every culture is not difficult to understand. So you learn it early on, and it has this pervasive influence on you, and you're they would never have been able to sell religion without the notion of heaven.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah. The Jesuits had the saying of something like, give me the boy till he's 8 and I have the man.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's ridiculous how powerful it is, and how many people let their children, people who aren't religious, let their children go to church with their grandparents. My brother is an atheist, and his kids were being raised without religion, and my parents got to take his kids to church. When I was still a believer, I took my niece to church a few times, and it was disheartening when I was an atheist years later and she was a teenager and was going to church, and it was like, I played a role in that.
Well, Sikivu Hutchinson, I mentioned earlier, who wrote Moral Combat, who writes about African Americans, she says, if the parents don't, the grandparents step right in. And if you're not doing the right thing, I'm going to take them to church.
Yep.
Yeah, that's a hard thing to break.
One of my stepdaughters is religious, and she hasn't read my book. And I think her husband is, he's very academic. He's read a lot, and I think he kind of just goes along with it. And she told me not to talk about the book to my grandchild, and she's only 10. I'll wait till she's 14 or so. We're taking her to Europe in a couple of years, and that's when
there you go. I mean, what better? Because Europe has become secular in its own way, especially Britain.
Well, and Iceland is the top country in terms of gender equality for pay. Mm-hmm. I wonder why.
Yeah, so
it's one of the least religious.
That's a perfect lesson. Just waiting to be
that, and also a couple of years ago they had the women's strike.
Yes.
All women for a couple of days didn't go to work.
I would love that here.
Well, that's what I think. If they keep attacking reproductive rights, that's what we should do.
Yeah.
I mean, I am very disconcerted about what's happening with the current administration, and just on so many fronts, the attacks that are being made. But now Trump is going to allow companies to choose whether they provide birth control or not to their employees. And I thought, well, okay, if they treat Viagra the same, but of course they won't.
Exactly.
And we're not even talking about abortion here. We're talking about birth control, which is what are we all going to go to the Quiverfill movement again? Let's everybody just get, barefoot and pregnant.
Yeah.
It's really sad. And then there's also the whole free speech issue. A old friend of mine sent me something today about, it may have been the University of Wisconsin, because that's where we both were. But they were talking about there's not going to be any protests anymore. They're not going to let, and this may be a proposal, I'm not sure, but they're not going to let people protest. And, my goodness, that was the hotbed of the opposition to the Vietnam War and so many political protests. I just can't imagine a campus without allowing people to object.
Yeah, well, they're objecting to the wrong people. So got to snuff that out.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
I can't believe the baby boomers who lived through that would let this happen to their kids.
Well, and, I'm a baby boomer, and that's why I started writing. When you lived in a time before abortion was legal, there were things that happened, and rumors about somebody going in your high school class going to New York for the weekend. And when I went to Concordia College, which is a Lutheran school, this was before 1973, Roe v. Wade, and we put an ad in our student newspaper with a phone call to New York because it was an abortion hotline and it was the only place it was legal, and they impounded all the newspapers and wouldn't let us send them out. So it was you couldn't even talk about it. It was a really, really different time. And it's not like today, and people are brought up with abstinence only. They have just as much sex, if not more, than and people who weren't. So it's not effective.
Oh, yeah.
And yet these people know nothing about birth control, nothing about safe sex, nothing about STDs, because they're just shielded from it.
Do you have anything more you want to say about your Women Beyond Belief book?
No, I would also add that I do have a blog, which is www.faithlessfeminist.com, and I write or have guest writers, always welcoming guest writers, love guest writers. And then I have a YouTube channel, which is mostly, and it's Faithless Feminist, where I've done a presentation to a group and then it's taped and I put that on there. I don't do a lot of that regularly, but one of the presentations is From Goddess to God, Elimination of the Feminine Divine. We talked a little bit about that, and it's about a 40-minute presentation that people can watch if they would like.
And we'll get to your upcoming book at the very end. We still have a bit of time. Okay, so you've talked about how you've been an atheist for a number of years, and you were raised in perfect North Dakota Lutheranville. How did you make the switch?
Well, it's kind of interesting. To me, it just was the way it was. And in the 60s, when you took a class on science and learned evolution, there was no objection to that. I mean, my dad was really religious, but he didn't have any problem with it. None of this intelligent design or creationism was big at all. It just kind of the way it was. And then I wanted, of course, my sister's never really forgiven me for this one, but our mother went back to work, and she's old. My older sisters had to go to a state school, and I got to go to the private school. But anyway, I went to she reminds me of that every now and again. I also got to have pierced ears, and she didn't. But anyway, that's what you get for being the last kid. So I went to Concordia College, and it was amazing. My first class, Religion 101, talked about those different 4 oral strains of the Old Testament. Talked about the exile in Babylon being a historical event. I didn't know any of that. All I heard were these kind of stories, and Martin Luther catechism was totally incomprehensible. I didn't get a thing out of that. The second year, the religion class, I did a book report on a book called Gay World. And I, didn't meet anyone before who was gay, et cetera. And I read the book and I thought, well, that makes sense. That's fine. If somebody is that way, that's great. And I gave the report and there were no objections to that. I had a course on Catholicism, and the guy wrote his name on the board. He wrote Father Emmerich Lawrence, OSB, Order of St. Benedict. And he goes, now don't get the order of those letters confused throughout the class. But he was funny, and he had us keep a journal, and we read this Catholic newspaper, and then we commented about it, and then he commented on our comments. I still have it. I held on to that. He was so thoughtful and went through it all. So then when I went to grad school, I was in Madison, Wisconsin in the 70s, and I didn't know anyone who went to church. And to me, church was family. You knew everyone in the pew. I just couldn't in the 90s, I think, I started reading the works of the Jesus Seminar. I don't remember how I got turned on to them, but Marcus Borg, John Dominic Crowson, and I read a lot of those books. And then I read Bishop John Shelby Spong book, Resurrection, Myth or Reality. And it's a long book where he talks about, look, I don't think there was a physical resurrection. Here's what I think happened. And when I was done with that book, I said, okay, there's no resurrection. There's no point in believing. And we were going to this church. It's kind of like my mother-in-law said. She came once and she said, well, that was a really good speech she did, but I wouldn't call it a sermon. It was kind of like listening to Stephen Covey or something, here's how you can do better in your life. And here's what you should do this week. And so we just stayed there. But it was kind of like all paths to God. It was kind of like a UU church. I was
going to say, it sounds very familiar to me.
Yeah. And it was a nice community and we got to meet people, but then they did some bad financial dealings and got in trouble and went belly up. And that's when we just quit going.
Okay. And by that point, you just didn't believe anymore. Well, obviously with okay. So with the Jesus Seminar and in my theology classes in college, we actually had, several professors talk about the Jesus Seminars and how terrible they were.
Oh, yeah. Well, they were looking at the historical Jesus, and they had a group of people. And one of the things they did an annotated version of the New Testament with black color for he couldn't possibly have said this, red for probably did, etc. And I had purchased a copy of that, and it was really interesting to read through. And the Jesus Seminar made Time magazine, I think in 1996 or something like that. So it was pretty well known. Oh, yeah. But, I read a lot of that stuff, gave it up. I'm not even sure I called myself an atheist, but there were a lot of atheists in the church we went to. It was, it was community. It was somewhere to go, and it was somewhere to take your kid, and there was music and stuff like that.
That's pretty much my plan.
Yeah, I miss the music. I really like singing in the choirs, and we got to walk down the church aisle singing and youth choir, and that was really cool. It was this kind of ritual. I mean, they build all this stuff around that you're tied to for. So I mean, we've had rituals for 40,000 years. So you start doing that and repeating it and singing songs. You don't want to give it up.
Yeah. Well.
Because it feels
the one UU service I went to, and Lauren thinks it was a bad example for me, but it was the creepiest parts were the coffee and donuts at the end.
I don't know. That's the best part.
I wanted, like, they were wanting all of the visitors to go there and talk to people. No, I wanted to get the hell out of there. There was the asking visitors to stand up, and I had done that quite a few times preaching, and I realized at that moment how terribly horrible and awkward and just terrible it is. But it was the songs and the kids going up, the candles, the ritual and tradition that exists for the sake of ritual and tradition. I had studied ritual and tradition enough to it seemed really odd for it to not be tied to something.
No, exactly. And I read in the 60s, they started out sharing, and you had to go introduce yourself to the person you were sitting next to. And, that was fine if I knew somebody, but I thought that was terrible. No,
it's very,
when that came in.
It's very extrovert positive and introvert negative.
Yeah.
Really.
They never used to do that growing up. We were Lutherans. We were Norwegian. You don't talk to somebody you don't know. I mean,
yeah. Well, and I've been to a few, in my later Christian days, for various reasons, went to a couple of Episcopalian services, and they were more for comparative religion class type stuff. But anyway, it was really interesting to see the fact that with them, it's tradition largely for the sake of tradition, because they've been doing it for so long. The connection to a belief is just more recent than what UUs have. It's really interesting to compare the two in that it's
exactly.
Then they throw one hell of a pagan Halloween party.
Yeah, but think of all the art. the church, it's kind of interesting because one of the commandments says you shall not make any graven images. Well, the people were illiterate, and I think it was Pope Gregory in the 4th or 5th century said, okay, we're going to do pictures. But the church controlled them all. So I remember when there were these stained glass windows in our church in Bismarck, and I didn't realize there were pictures until I got glasses in 4th grade. I went, wow, this is really cool. Our pictures are, anyway. And in the new church they built, big controversy, spending a lot of money. They just had blocks of glass for the windows, kind of modern art. And it just seemed wrong to me. It's like, why wouldn't you use those pictures you had before? So you get used to something and it feels comfortable, and then somebody does something totally different. You go, well, that doesn't feel like church.
Yeah.
And if you've been in the cathedrals in Europe, oh my goodness, just think of how much time was spent making those, and they're awesome.
Oh man, my one of my brothers is in Portland, and he's in a band, and they've done a couple European tours. In Europe they played, in one case it was a anarchist camp in a abandoned Nazi concentration camp that was still standing.
Wow.
Another one was in an abandoned cathedral, also under the control of anarchists. And he's in
they like punk rock
band. European anarchists apparently love punk rock. And apparently, playing punk rock in a cathedral is just an amazing experience.
I bet playing anything. Well, I think we could turn the cathedrals into bookstores.
Yeah, or coffee.
That's my idea.
Coffee shop bookstores.
Yeah,
that'd be awesome.
Wouldn't that be great?
In fact, that's they did that here in Eagle, right outside of Boise. There was an old church that they turned into basically a coffee shop, and it's gorgeous. Cool. It's awesome.
Nice. Okay, so we're getting low on time, but we definitely need to talk about the Metathesis Milwaukee concert. Not concert. Talking about my brother. The conference. So when you signed up for that, what were you expecting?
Well, I had been on their podcast, and I had done a Skype presentation for one of their meetings, and I met the guys at Reason Rally, and I remember Sean saying, oh, my mother liked your book, or something, liked your interview, which was really kind of funny. And they asked me to do some advertising on my blog and gave out some free tickets. And so I didn't even think twice about it. I didn't even look at it, and said sure, and did that. And then they gave me 2 VIP tickets. So I contacted a friend in Wisconsin, because that's where I went to school, and said, you want to come down for the weekend? And, she's one of my best friends. And I didn't really pay any attention until it came out on Facebook and Twitter that Sargon of Akkad was going to be there. And I know him. I've watched his channel. I've watched Christy Winters debate him. And I just saw these people pull out. Seth Andrews and Aaron Ra pulled out. And I had my airlines booked. So I wasn't going to lose my airline fare. So I went anyway. And there were some very good presentations. Melissa Chen did a very good presentation about what's happened to Enlightenment values. And Faisal and Azra did a debate about whether you could reform Islam. And Ron Miscavige, who is the father of the person in Scientology, gave a talk. But there was the Armored Skeptic and Shoehead. When somebody starts out, there are like 500 people there, and she says, I've never done a public presentation before. You kind of, feel sorry for her, and you kind of cringe a little. And that was, that was kind of blasé. It wasn't that big of a deal. But when Thomas Smith, who was originally going to debate or moderate or interview David Rubin pulled out for I don't know why, but then when they substituted Sargon of Akkad, Thomas Smith was debating him, and boy, I'm not sure I would have wanted to do that. But they started out with Thomas Smith saying, how could you say, in reference to this whole thing with the member of parliament, the woman who had been sexually assaulted and then was trying to do something on the internet to reduce threats. And he said publicly, in terms of like on Twitter or something, said, well, I wouldn't even rape you. And so Thomas says, how could you say that? And he said, well, I didn't see any problem with it. And the audience clapped. And it was kind of downhill from then, because I looked around, mostly white men. There were women there who were supporting Sargon too, you know. But I thought, wow, they think that's appropriate to say that to somebody who's been sexually assaulted, or to say it at all. You know, where did they grow up? What did their parents teach them? It was very, very depressing. And then, of course, you know, he's an anti-feminist. He's an anti-SJW, anti-intersectionality. And he talked about all of this being Marxist collectivism, which is a real stretch for me. But I asked the first question, snuck my way up there. And I said, you know, I'm the faithless feminist. One of my goals is to get women to leave religion. I believe that religion is the last cultural barrier to gender equality. And I'm not sure we're going to achieve that goal listening to two white men talk about feminism. And of course, the first thing Sargon said was, oh, well, I'll try not to be a white male next time. And when I did my blog post about the conference, I got more shares of that post than I ever did before. And I got the most comments. And some of them for people called me a racist or a sexist, because I thought it was appropriate to have a woman on that panel. And I thought, you know, what's the world coming to?
That's the minefield I was talking about before.
Yeah,
you can't.
Exactly. And I wrote in one of my replies, I said, if you were going to do a panel on PTSD of soldiers returning from Afghanistan, you know, you would have a psychiatrist on there. You would have maybe an historian, war historian. But wouldn't you have people who actually went through it? So to me, it's just logic. Like, you're going to have a child. If you were going to do what do women feel when they go through labor, are you going to have all doctors on that panel who are men? No, you're going to have hopefully women doctors, hopefully women who've actually gone
right. This
through
isn't the U.S. government.
Say,
this is a secular conference.
Yeah, exactly. And so, as I said, the most disconcerting thing to me was how the audience reacted. And Matt Dillahunty did like an hour YouTube video about how he was involved and all of his reasons and he wouldn't be going again. I would hope they would change their format, but they had said on the Atheist Manifesto with Callie Wright, they had said, well, this God is dead thing is kind of old. We've got to do something new. Well, you know, if you're not going to talk about atheism or skepticism, you want to be the Mythicist Milwaukee still? Because this stuff was far afield from anything to do with skepticism or atheism.
And when you call it the Mythinformation Conference, I would assume there'd be at least some talk about mythicism, maybe about ancient myths.
Yeah. Well, and I would have loved to give my presentation and show how this transformation from the feminine divine to a male deity had an impact on women and still has today.
Yeah.
Sounds relevant.
You know, that would have, to me, matched the format of Mythicist Milwaukee. It'll be very interesting to see what happens. You know, anytime you get a movement, you get polarization. And long before I became involved, I heard about Atheism Plus and, you know, Elevator Gate and some of those things. But you move on from it and you try to, you know, have you can always have people debating somebody who's different. You know what I mean? But to have something like Sargon on there about anti-SJW, what does that have to do with mythicism? I just don't get it.
That's well, maybe you shouldn't invite somebody who sounds like a bad guy from Lord of the Rings. Just thinking. But no, it was obvious that they were going for trying to take advantage of the political climate, and that sometimes is just not what you should be doing if you're going to have a whole conference.
Unfortunately, it sounds like a lot of people there liked it.
Yeah. Well, and Sargon is reportedly to buy into this 9/11 truther movement or whatever that says 9/11 was a government plot. And, you know, why would you have somebody who's not even a skeptic, really? Mm-hmm. You know, believes in crazy theories, et cetera, with no proof whatsoever. Why would you have somebody like that on? Now, part of it is he's got hundreds of thousands of followers. So he's very popular, and I suppose you bring a big name on because you're going to, and they sold more seats than they'd ever sold before. But if that's the way they want to go, they're going to lose a lot of people who were there for other reasons. And if you want to turn into this, you know, echo chamber about anti-feminism and anti-SJW, et cetera, that you ask 100 people on the street, they've never heard of SJW. And most people would define feminism as gender equality. You're going to get this little group of people here talking to each other. And if that's what you want to do, I guess that's what you want to do. I'm sad that that's where they went.
You can't claim to be one thing and do that and be another. Yep. Yeah. Red flags when everybody started dropping out because of this guy.
Yeah. And the Metathesis Milwaukee group have definitely lost their credibility.
Well, that's a shame.
Damn. Well, what's your next book?
Oh, well, the next book is called Women versus Religion, The Case Against Faith and for Freedom. And this book, I met a lot of people at the Women in Secularism Conference, and over the last 2 years who were authors or bloggers like Valerie Trico, Abby Hafer, Candace Gorham, and they all write about, and it's kind of more academic than, academic's not the right word, but it's more explanatory than, it's not really personal stories. So I have 2 African Americans who write about, what's the impact of, slavery and the imposition of Christianity and then Civil Rights Act. I mean, going through all of that on African Americans. I have a woman who's an ex-Muslim. I have 2 Hispanic women, Hypatia Alexandria and Marilyn Delilah, who talk about the specific issues within churches that are primarily Hispanic and how the culture treats Hispanic women and how more difficult it is to get out. So it's a wide-ranging set of essays that would be very good. One of the things I'm going to try to market to is women's studies programs, because I don't know how you can talk about gender studies or women's studies if you don't look at the impact religion has had.
Those tend to go hand in hand.
So I'm hoping to market to that. It's going to be out in the spring, and I'm really looking forward to getting back on podcasts and talking about that and reading some of the excerpts.
Awesome.
That is fantastic.
That sounds quite fascinating. All right. Well, what do you have to plug?
Well, I have the 2 books, Women Beyond Belief, Discovering Life Without Religion, which you can get in audio, Kindle, paperback. It's in bookstores. It's also online. And my blog is www.faithlessfeminist.com. You can find me in YouTube under Faithless Feminist. On Twitter, I'm at Karen_Garst, all lower letters. And I've tried to, on that, I post some of my blogs, but I do try to do memes. And I'm working on getting more up and out on Twitter. And then my next book, Women versus Religion, The Case Against Faith and for Freedom. It's already up on Amazon, but you can't order it yet. And that'll be available in the spring. And I want to say thanks to Dustin and Lauren for having me on. I'm looking out at a sunny day in Oregon, and it was great talking to both of you.
Oh, I almost feel bad now. Now you want to go outside and play in the sun. You don't get that in Portland very often.
No, you don't. It's kind of our rainy season for the next 9 months now, but it's a beautiful place. Man,
if we could ever find a way to get you to Boise, we'll let you know.
Oh, okay. Well, Boise's not very far.
It's rather convenient.
Well, thank you very much for joining us, and have yourself a wonderful day.
And good luck on the ordering your epidural.
Right? Yeah. Okay. I'll work on that.
And all that remains is to remind you that not all those who wander are lost. Thank you for listening to another episode of Atheist Nomads. You can find show notes and contact information at atheistnomads.com. Follow us on Twitter at Atheist Nomads, and like us on Facebook at facebook.com/Atheist Nomads. Please subscribe to the show in iTunes, Stitcher, or your podcatcher of choice, and while you're there, feel free to leave us a review. Theme music is courtesy of Sturdy Fred. Until next time, this has been the Atheist Nomads.